Joyce, the statistics tell us that women are very underrepresented in STEM careers. Why do you think that is? Or to put it another way, what are some of the challenges that females have in accessing STEM-related careers?
Well, we know that there's no skill set difference between boys and girls. There's no one sex that's better at mathematics or spatial reasoning or verbal recall. But because there's no ability gap, the reason for the STEM shortage for for women, especially in the UK, must be due to other reasons, perhaps social constructs. I view it as due to social belonging, so this feeling that you can see yourself in a community of engineers, doctors, of people who work in technology, mathematics, engineering, as well as social efficacy. So the belief that you can do well, you have a successful pathway to a good career and an upwardly mobile career in STEM. So these two social constructs are I think, holding women back from further participation in STEM. And I think Alicia might be able to speak more to the actual data in the UK.
Yeah, so when you get to graduation level, we see there is a massive kind of problem with attracting women into the workforce and into STEM-related subjects. However, the issue actually happens way before that in schools. So kind of post-16-year-olds, only 35% of girls progress with STEM-related subjects compared to 94% of their male counterparts. So kind of the issue there is making STEM, not just STEM subjects, but STEM careers more visible and attractive to women at that age. A lot of girls at that age can't necessarily see themselves within a particular job that's related to STEM in the future, because it doesn't always necessarily follow kind of the key jobs that are kind of showcased at that age. And so kind of in order to address STEM at workforce level, you have to really address STEM at school level first.
You were named Young Woman Engineer of the Year last year, and yet you were just telling me that until you were 16 you didn't know that, I quote, engineering was a thing. So how did you eventually find your way into a STEM education and career?
Yes, so I first discovered engineering when I was in 5th year of high school. My art teacher convinced me and one of my classmates to sneak out with him and the final year students to the Glasgow School of Art Open Day, and that was when we both discovered engineering. Before that, as you say, I didn't even know it was a thing. I didn't know it was an option. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know anything about it. But on that day, I saw the creativity and the excitement and just the weird and wonderful things you could do with engineering, and it perfectly combined my love of art and design and maths and physics. And I was able to choose my final year subjects at school to enable me to do that course and become an engineer.
Fantastic story. So fast forward a few years and now you're an engineer and you're working for ORE Catapult and you're helping to test and drive novel solutions and technologies. As a female in an operational environment, have you faced any specific challenges?
When I first started, trying to get PPE to fit was an issue. My first set of overalls to fit on my legs, the shoulders came up to here, so I had to roll it round in the middle so that I could actually see where it was going. These days you've got a wide range of PPE now available. They've even started a maternity line, which I know there's a few ladies that are very excited about through the Women's Engineering Society. But other than that, working with an operational team on an operational site is just really exciting. It gets you out of the office, you get some fresh air, you get to meet a whole new bunch of people, and it's just great.
So from what you're saying then, gender equality seems to be less of an issue in this sector than in perhaps more mature sectors. And yet the workforce is still predominant, well, I would say male dominated. Would you say the issue is more with education then?
There are studies that show that until the age of 8, children in primary schools, they progress at the same rate, but then about the age 9 is when the societal stereotypes break in and girls start doing girl things and boys start doing boy things, and engineering, technology, science subjects are still very much seen as boy things. So there's a massive drop off from advanced higher A-levels, AS levels of girls into physics and technology subjects. And then obviously into university again, you've got a massive drop-off. So a lot of the women's organisations, Women's Engineering Society, GWEC Scotland, WISE, they talk about the leaky pipeline, and it's trying to keep girls interested along the way and get them into the industry and support them once they're there to stay in the industry, because it's such an exciting industry to be in.
And I know that you are involved in a number of initiatives to really tackle that at the kind of source of the problem. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm a very enthusiastic STEM ambassador, have been since 2010, and it's just working with a lot of the organisations, charities that are already out there, Primary Engineer, First Lego League, the IET, all the institutions have their own STEM initiatives, and it's getting those into the schools and helping train the teachers, because a lot of it is this unconscious bias and the stereotypes that girls can't do maths, where they absolutely can, and in most cases, when they're not told that boys do better, they actually do better than the boys. It's this kind of expectation and the holdback of societal opinions that's driving the problems.
So this is something that's really close to my heart, and I think it's great that the sector deal has set itself such an ambitious target on gender diversity specifically, and would like to congratulate our UK on being able to get their 30% target met today of female speakers in all of the sessions, which is great. One thing I think we've been very good at so far as an industry is identifying the issue of gender diversity and trying to come up with ways to resolve that problem and actually hitting those targets as we go through. But something that I think we need to do a lot more on and pay a lot more attention to is intersectional diversity, so things like age, nationality, race, and in our industry as well, technology background as well. The more different people you get sat around the table, the more different perspectives you can get, which ultimately makes our conversations more interesting. And I'm aware that the sector deal is going to set itself a target this year for BAME participants in the industry in the next few years going forward, which is really positive, so pleased to see that in there.
I think sadly there's still quite a lot of, whether it's conscious or unconscious bias in the way that girls at a very young age are positioned towards certain career types. I think there is a perception of things like engineering that it's quite a dirty job, that it's all hands-on, it's very physical, and I think quite often that means that some of the careers advice or early indications that young girls get doesn't really point them towards the sorts of areas that would really support this industry, which I think is a real shame, and I don't think really reflects what the engineers that I work with every day actually do on the ground. So it would be really nice to see some of that starting to change, some of that mentality. I think one of the other things that we see in young girls is potentially quite a lot of leaning more towards creative activities at a young age. And something one of my colleagues mentioned to me earlier was, had I heard about the idea to transform the idea of STEM more into STEAM, so to add an A, the A being for arts. And that's kind of in recognition that historically, actually, some of the real groundbreaking scientists, the likes of Da Vinci, were artists as much as they were engineers, and that it recognises the creativity and innovation that goes into a lot of the STEM subjects. And I think that's a really nice concept that might actually start to better get across to young children across the board, actually, how engineering can offer a really exciting a career that can give them something that's they can apply their imagination to, and that they can really add something to. From that perspective, it's not just following procedures, formulas, fixing things as they should be. So I think that concept is quite a nice idea that maybe we should be thinking about a bit more as an industry.
That's a fascinating idea. It really is. So from what you're saying, it seems like the issues don't start in the workplace, they start earlier on. So I mean, you've just come up with some really good thoughts there, but just to expand on that, in your experience, what measures do you think we can take within our communities and within the education system to make engineering more accessible and more attractive for females?
Yeah, I think you're correct. I think obviously there are still some barriers in the workplace for people once they get there, but I think until we reach that stage where young girls, as much as young boys, are saying they want jobs that are linked to engineering, I think we haven't won this battle yet. And I think trying to go into communities, to go into children at that level where you can influence them. So I think that's from primary age right the way through secondary. As children are starting to think about their GCSEs and beyond that A-levels, we need to make sure that they understand the sorts of careers that are available to them.
And there are all sorts of programs that different companies within the industry do, that the industry does themselves. Equinor, who I work for, we sponsor an exhibition called the Wonder Lab at the Science Museum, and it's all about trying to inspire those potential young scientists of the future and give them a bit of energy in that area. And actually we run a competition off the back of that every year called the Young Imagineers competition, and it's open to a wide range of children to come and give us imaginative ideas for inventions of the future that could be really inspiring, hopefully, to others. But then sometimes we do work associated with particular projects as well. So with our High Wind Scotland project, we've opened what we call the High Wind Hub. And the idea is to really promote the development of STEM amongst the communities in Aberdeenshire. There are programmes for school-aged children from primary right through to secondary. We also offer the opportunity to give some teachers additional training in some of the background to STEM and how that could actually help them to develop and inspire their school pupils as well. So there's a wide range of things like that you can do, and I think actually developers are already starting to do those. I just think because we're trying to hit that young generation, it will take a few years, unfortunately, to see the full effects of that, and I don't think we should lose hope in that time frame, and it's really important that we continue doing that type of work so that we see the outcome over the next decade or so within the industry.
Yes, so Orsted is fully committed to the gender diversity ambition. We've really focused on the 33% ambition that's within the sector deal to try and get a lot more women, 33% to be employed by the sector essentially. Gender diversity is really important. We have to try and encourage and promote the idea of science and engineering, and basically the whole aspect of technology to young women of the future. And there is a huge opportunity now to involve them, essentially.
As part of the sector deal, the growth that we're going to need to actually deliver 30 gigawatts by 2030, at the minute, in terms of people directly employed in our industry, we've got about 7,000 people in terms of those involved in the development, construction and operation of wind farms, many, many more in the supply chain. We're going to take that 7,000 and have to increase it to 27,000. We're going to more than treble our workforce. And how are we going to attract those people? How are we going to bring forward the talented people that we need to our industry? How do we create awareness of our industry to the broadest possible pool and attract them? And yeah, I must admit, you look at some of the documentation around the sector deal, and some of the images in there were chosen quite specifically. I think I'd challenge you to try and find a picture of a white man working in our industry. Because quite honestly, we attract them. They know who we are, and they can visualise themselves working in our industry. So now we've got to broaden that scope. We've got to reach out to a much, much wider audience. And so, I mean, just bearing in mind that when you're a child, you're asked at the age of 10 or the age of 12, what do you want to be when you grow up? Your career aspirations at that age, and throughout your career in fact, are based on the opportunities you know are available and those you can visualise yourself doing. And we've got to get more people visualising the opportunities and the myriad of opportunities that are available in our industry and recognising that they want to work there. So, as the sector deal, we've chosen to focus initially on gender. We also intend to bring forward BAME targets. Now, I mean, gender, that's just one small aspect of diversity. Diversity is ethnicity, it's race, it's age, there's disability, there's so many other attributes that we need to focus on. So why just gender? Are we just being too focused? To be honest, we have to think about what we can do immediately, and we can measure gender. That's easy to do. If I could get the statistics for the industry on LGBT and things like that, that would be great, because then we can start having conversations there. But so at the minute, okay, let's start with gender. But let's deliver that in a smart way. If we start having conversations with our employees and our female employees about how do we attract, develop and retain more women in our industry. Often they talk about the fact that they would like more flexible working opportunities, agile working, flexible hours. When we advertise a role, do we have to advertise it as full-time? Do we have to advertise that it must have absolute global relocation potential? Can we scale some of that back? And if we start considering that for the women that work in our industry to make that role and our industry more attractive to them, well, guess what? They're not the only people who are parents. There's a lot of men in our industry are parents. Suddenly we've got a parent-friendly policy. But then it goes beyond that. You've got people who, I mean, I don't have young children, but elderly parents. And so thinking about, okay, how do I manage my work-life balance that means that I can spend time caring for them? So then you've suddenly got a policy that attracts somebody of a certain age. We then start thinking about some younger person who's got some great passion for snowboarding, mountain biking, just something, and you know, they really want to compete in their industry. And if they can have some flexible working that allows them to do that, we are so much more attractive to them. And then we take that to religion and ethnicity. I mean, we have Muslim people working for us, and when you think about when they're fasting through Ramadan, they need those flexible, agile working. So all of a sudden, we've taken this initiative that was aimed at women, and we're doing this initiative because we can measure it, and then we start evolving that and creating policies that just work right across creating an inclusive culture. Because if we're going to treble our workforce, let's set those foundations now so that as we grow, we do so in an inclusive way.
I completely understand what you're saying about starting with gender and moving on, but the challenge with gender diversity targets is it not just another form of discrimination?
Personally speaking, for years I resisted any form of positive discrimination. I mean, I didn't either. I could stand on my own 2 feet. I wasn't going to get the job because I was a woman. I was going to get the job because I'm right for the woman. But at the same time, perhaps we do need to level the playing field. Perhaps we do need to start promoting, creating role models so that then more girls can visualise themselves coming into our industry. I mean, at the minute, we've got 16% females in our industry. We need to have that target to get it up to 33%, to create those role models, to create that focus on how we deliver it. So, okay, maybe somewhat reluctantly, I am now a convert to those targets, and having something that perhaps tilts the playing field maybe back to a level position and seeing it that way, because by doing that, like I say, that's how we're going to deliver those changes and that focus on what needs to be done.
Yeah, so one of the ways that offshore wind is developed within the UK around a number of coastal communities is that it often finds an O&M base, and the local communities that are most affected by the offshore wind farm tend to come from maybe a more deprived background. Perhaps they've faced more high unemployment. That's just a historical factor of how coastal communities in the UK have developed. But what it means is that there's an opportunity there for offshore wind to bring investment and see economic growth happen. But that doesn't just happen by awarding contracts. It's really important that developers, like those who are involved in the Offshore Wind Industry Council, really pay attention to the local areas where they're developing. They really think about how the O&M development can help those areas. Sometimes that's with long-term jobs, sometimes that's with a contracting strategy that looks at what local contractors are available to support you. And sometimes it's just about speaking to your local authorities and the stakeholders about what their needs are. Perhaps it's a skills gap in a particular area that they want support in, or perhaps they have high unemployment and they want you to help with reskilling people who have previously fallen out of unemployment.
You've described a very rich and complex picture there. Are there any specific measures in place that are designed to address the sector's diversity goals?
Yes, absolutely. So as a sector, we have made a really good commitment to increase the number of women in the offshore wind industry by 1/3. I think that's really important to set that target because it gives you a measurement tool. But it goes beyond that as well. We're also looking at black and minority ethnic communities and how we can increase their representation in the offshore wind business. And I know that later this year we will set a target for that. I think that's equally as important an area to set a target for. But it's also just about thinking, what can we do in business to change the culture so that these diversity issues are more than just a target. It's not just ticking a box exercise. It's about changing the future of our business so that in 30 years' time, I can look across the landscape of people at a conference like this and see a number of different faces. And with that, I'll get a number of different ideas as well.
Indeed. And related to that, I believe you're part of the Renewable UK Switch List programme.
Yes.
Can you tell me a bit about that and how that works and what that's doing for you?
Yeah, well, it's really simple tool actually. You basically just sign up and you put in your contact details, who you are, where you work, and then a description of things that you are, a specialist topic in. And I know sometimes that's difficult to think, well, what am I a specialist in? Just look at your job profile, chat to folk around you, ask them, what do you think I'm best at talking about? What am I most passionate about? Bang that in. Next time there's an event coming up and RUK have the switch list available, someone can come to you and say, I'd like to invite you to my panel. And it means that where previously you might have seen an entirely male panel, they've got the opportunity now to say, actually, there's a woman here that knows just as much about this topic. Let's invite her on to speak.
I think traditionally, girls haven't been inclined to go towards engineering. I think what we've now got is an opportunity coming up in offshore wind where we are going to have many more jobs. This is about artificial intelligence, it's about computer science, robotics, drones. It's got many, many other areas, chemical engineering with hydrogen balancing the grid. And these are areas that women, girls, are traditionally really, really good at. Clean tech has a good agenda for supporting the world and making the world a better place. These are things that traditionally appeal to young girls and other forms and other diversity. So I think that what's coming up is this will encourage more women into engineering and technical careers.
Absolutely. And Natasha, would you add anything to that?
Yes, I would actually, because I studied physics at university and I was one of 10 women in a class of 100 men. So what I find is it can be quite daunting for young women to go into something that's quite male-dominated or quite different. So my advice would be to be brave and to go into subjects and areas that are slightly different and slightly different essentially. So I think it's a brave world that they need to go into, and I'd encourage that.
And I know that there have been great efforts and lots of initiatives designed to kind of tackle some of those issues you mentioned and to break down those obstacles. Joyce, I know that Global Wind Energy Council have really led on this. Can you tell me a bit about some of those initiatives?
So this year we've partnered with the Global Women's Network for Energy Transition to create a program called Women in Wind's Global Leadership Program. And what we are trying to do with this program is address both the discipline gap, so going back to the shortage of women in STEM fields, as well as the leadership gap, so addressing the dearth of women in senior roles in the energy industry. And we're doing that with a multidimensional program which includes mentorship, which includes learning and development through knowledge transfer webinars, and which includes in-person networking opportunities. On top of that, there's the challenge for many women of intersectionality, so not just dealing with the challenge of being the only or one of the only women in the room, but also coming from a different sociocultural or even ethnocultural context. Because GWEC is active in emerging wind markets around the world, and a lot of our work is done in the global south, in Latin America, in Africa, and in Southeast Asia, the participants for our Women in Wind program do come from these markets where they are not only women, but they're women of color. So this program is designed to speak to multiple challenges in that respect. And I would just add, back to the STEM participation, I think we should applaud the UK public sector for stepping up and having very ambitious targets with the UK offshore sector deal to have 32% of the offshore workforce by 2030 composed of women. And that's a long way to go from the current 14 or 16%. So doubling that amount of female participation over the course of a decade. But where GWEC can feed in is in corporate leadership. Because the private sector is somewhat shielded from the public scrutiny, from the higher transparency standards that are placed upon the public sector in terms of female representation and female pay gap, often the private sector aren't as responsible stakeholders in the respect of female numbers as well as female compensation. So I think what we're trying to do is not only push the needle in the right direction in the private sector, but also provide a platform for companies to demonstrate their gender-inclusive policies and lead the way by example.
And Alicia, I know that Renewable UK has also led quite a few initiatives to support this. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so we put together our project last year at Global Offshore Wind called Switch, And we decided to set up this initiative based on the fact that we wanted to provide tools to industry to help promote diversity that was already going to support existing campaigns out there, so the likes of Powerful Women, Women in Sustainability, Entrepreneurial Women in Renewable Energy, Women in Engineering. There's so many different initiatives out there doing great things with mentoring, with events, getting women together, and we wanted to be able to provide tools that would support that and do something a bit different. So the kind of main ones we've done so far is we set up a webinar series that's just started, and we also set up the switch list. So that kind of came about from internal discussions with our own kind of diversity committee on seeing there was a lack of female representation at events, and that panels weren't necessarily diverse. And we started to question why was this the case, and a lot of the problem came back to not having access to female speakers' names, and not knowing kind of where to find more diverse speakers, particularly given time constraints of putting programs together. So we set up the Switch List, which is a crowdsourced database of women working across energy, not just in renewables, free to access, free to download. And the idea is that event organisers can use it to find female thought leaders and experts in different areas of the energy sector for their events, but also to kind of showcase the different seniority of women across the sector. So we have women in there from intern level all the way to CEOs across 10 different countries, and it's rapidly growing. We're at 390 as of yesterday, so nearly at 400. Yeah, and it's great. It's been great to kind of get some feedback from it as well. We've had women contact us with kind of saying, thank you, I haven't spoken at an event before, and because I was on the list, I was picked, which was really nice. We also have an internal pledge to have 30% female speakers at our events, which also helps kind of drive internal processes and change the kind of internal culture Renewable UK, where everyone's constantly thinking about how can we promote diversity better and how can we support diverse perspectives in the sector. So yeah, it's been really good, but still growing, and very much looking forward to see what we can do this year with it too.